Hey everybody, it's Mac here. Welcome back to another new video. Today we're going to be taking a look at creating a custom Fortune database. If you're not familiar with Fortune, this is a really nice little command line app that, when spelled correctly, will print a quote or a line or a little piece of text, an excerpt from something onto your command line. You get a different little piece of text, and it's pretty nice. It's pretty common for people to run Fortune in tandem with another app like Cowsay or Toilet to give it some more aggressive kind of styling. We can do that pretty simply by running Fortune and then passing it through Cowsay with a pipe like this, and then we'll get a nice little cow telling us a quote. And there's even some options within Cowsay that will let us get kind of crazy with the styling. But what I thought was even more interesting was the possibility of hooking up your own Fortune database. You know, Fortune will display a number of different quotes and lines from different books and things, a lot of programmery type quotes, some of them long, some of them short. So I started trying to figure out a way to maybe make my own app. It's basically just a clone of Fortune. But then I realized that was actually kind of completely unnecessary. If you take a look at the Fortune man page, you'll see that Fortune will actually allow you to pipe through your own custom database as long as it's stored in a database file, and that's any file with the .dat extension. So the first thing we need to do to make this happen is just create a new file. I'm going to be using Vim just because I like it. You can use any editor you're comfortable with. One other thing to mention is that you can give this a file extension like .text, and it shouldn't really affect anything, but you certainly don't have to, so I'm just going to leave it as is. You could also, in theory, just add a dot to the beginning of the file name here, and as long as you're on macOS or Linux or BSD or something, it should make this file into a hidden file, so that might be a cool experiment if you're interested. I usually have my Finder set to show hidden files anyways, so it doesn't really make much of a difference for me. So now what we have to do is populate this new file with quotes or lines that we like or passages from books, whatever we want Fortune to output when we run it. There are two important things to keep in mind. First is that all of our individual quotes need to be contained onto one line. That includes like the actual quote, any formatting, if you want to do like an author attribution, all of that needs to be on one line. So we would do like, this is a quote, and then I'll attribute it to myself. We want to make sure that every little piece of it is contained to one line. The second thing to know is that in between each quote that you write, you need to have a %sign, and then you can go on to the next quote. The reason for this is because in a second, we're going to use a program called strfile or strfile, or you can pronounce this however many number of ways you want. And the way that this file works, if we open up the man page, is that it's going to take a file that we input it and convert it into a DAT file. Now the thing is, this program uses the %sign as a delimiter character to help it know when we're moving on to a next line and when it needs to create a new database entry. You can actually feed this app different options and use a different delimiter character if you just really hate the %sign or something. I think it's probably easiest just to use the default options. We'll go back into our script now, and I will just fill this out with some actual quotes that I like, and then we can create our DAT file. So we're going to do just a few lines here. Burn. Again, we need to separate everything with that delimiter character, which in this case is the %sign, and those who... So now we can go ahead and right quit those changes, and we should have a new file called Cool Quotes. At least that's what I'm naming mine. And now we can use that strfile program to go ahead and create a database. So the way that this works is pretty simple. You would do strfile, and then you would just feed it the name of your file. In this case, Cool Quotes. Make sure you add the extension if you did a file extension on your file. And then we'll just hit run. Make sure we have this spelled correctly. And we're going to get a little bit of output here. Coolquotes.dat was created. We can double check, and there it is right there. It's telling us how many strings there are, what the longest string was, what the shortest string was. Cool. And now we can feed this to Fortune by typing in the name of our file, Cool Quotes. And the thing to keep in mind here is that Fortune actually is referencing this database file here, the coolquotes.dat. It's just that Fortune requires input without the file extension, so it is still reading this file. We just type it without the file extension. That might be a little bit confusing for people, but just make sure you don't delete this .dat file. It is being used by Fortune, but when we run Fortune with the option to use our new database, we should get our own custom quote. And if we run this a couple more times, we only had a few quotes. It's not super random, it just wants to say the same thing over and over again, but we will get quotes from our own database. One other thing to point out is that Fortune will still work this way with any of the other things that we could do with it. So if I do Fortune and then hook up my custom database, I'll still be able to do something like pipe that through Calc and get that nice ASCII art, just now using our own custom database. Now, if you're looking for something to actually do with this custom database, I'll show you what I've done with it. If I go into my Z profile here, this is a file that will allow us to run some commands in front of our command prompt for Z shell. I'll just show you what it does here. You can see I'm using Fortune and then a custom quote database and piping that through Calc. So every time I open a new shell, I get a nice little bit of ASCII art, this dragon saying a quote, which is, interesting and fun, I guess. I assume most people coming here already kind of know what Fortune does, but just in case you were looking for something to do with it, this is kind of how I use it. And this is something that you should be able to do in Bash or K-Shell or any other shell that you want to use. But that is all for this video. Thank you everyone for checking it out, and I will see you in the next one. Hang on. We're into overtime here, guys. I just noticed something interesting. If I run Fortune here with my custom database, and I might have to do it a couple of times, you'll see something interesting that's happening. We are printing both two lines at once. This line from, I think, Confucius, and then this other one from Dune. And you'll see we have a little % sign in front of it. So we've made an error, actually, in setting up our cool quotes file. Let's take a look at what happened. It looks like what's going on is we've actually printed this delimiter character, the % sign, on the same line as this quote right here. So it's just reading this whole grouping as one quote. And if we were to make Vim a little bit bigger, we could probably see that in more detail. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'll just come to the end of the line here, bump that down, and then we should be able to write those changes. We'll have to remove the cool quotes database file, and then we can run it through the str file program again. Okay, and now if we run Fortune with the option to use our database, yes, we're going to get all three of our quotes rather than just one or two. Okay, very nice. Thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you in the next one.